What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast. It is Wednesday, and in college football, that means it's a test day. No, not the usual kind of test, the COVID test. We don't know yet what the results are today, but we don't know if anybody's got enough players to play the games. We don't know if anybody's got enough centers, enough D linemen, enough quarterbacks, whatever, but we can infer that Kansas State might actually be a little bit short. At least that's the way Kansas State coach Chris Klieman has been talking all week, Parker, including his weekly press conference on Tuesday where he said, we're really close.
Yeah, definitely, John. And it's a little concerning because you listen to Klieman speak, and he's very obviously concerned that this game is not going to get played on Saturday. But then Lincoln Riley doesn't seem to have any concerns as to whether this game is going to get played this weekend or not, at least publicly. I tell you what, you would figure that if Lincoln had any doubt that this game was going to be played on Saturday, he would have given us some inkling of that, but he hasn't. It's pretty much all coming from the Kansas State side right now, so I'm not sure to what extent they're communicating, corresponding to try and figure out logistics for this weekend's game, but the next couple days here are going to be really telling, especially with the next round of testing rolling in.
Scary, scary times. I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. Parker Thune, he's over there in Norman. Thanks for listening to the SI Sooners podcast, and thank you again for watching the SI Sooners podcast on YouTube. As I said, it is only Wednesday, but I asked Lincoln Riley yesterday at his usual Tuesday Zoom press conference about having to hold his breath when the team gets their COVID tests every Friday before a game. Can you imagine the tension? He basically said that it was that way the first week, but they're kind of gotten used to it, the stress of it all. And both coaches, both Lincoln Riley and Chris Klieman, have said it is essentially, right now, it's a never-ending source of stress. They test 3 times a week, and every time it's a source of stress. But Fridays, Lincoln Riley said they go about their usual routine. And then he gets a call from the head athletic trainer, Scott Anderson, and he said it's either a happy call or a sad call, Parker.
Yeah, definitely. And the Sooners seem to be in much better shape than Kansas State. At least that's the way that Riley's making it sound. Because as I mentioned, John, you're just getting 2 completely different vibes. Riley says, we're dealing with attrition. In fact, he even mentioned me and Coach Gundy and Coach Murray have lined up with the scout team on occasion to try and fill some of the holes that COVID-19 protocol has created in terms of their practice routine. But Kansas State seems very much concerned, and we heard Klieman say, hey, we are getting dangerously close to one of those positional minimum thresholds. So really going to be crossing our fingers here, John, and hoping for the best with this next round of testing data.
This is one of those days, Parker, where we back in the day, we used to have access to practice. This is one of those days I wish we had access to practice so I could see DeMarco Murray carry the football for the Oklahoma scout team and Lincoln Riley maybe line up at wide receiver for the Oklahoma scout team. And who knows, Cale Gundy probably quarterbacking the Oklahoma scout team. I'm just saying, that'd be fun to see those guys out there doing that. Parker, I got to say this, man. I hate to say this. But I had the thought today that it might be maybe it was a bad idea to play college football at all this year, Just look around. Tulsa's game with Arkansas State got postponed today. That's 2 in 3 weeks for TU, and 2, I think, in 4 weeks for Arkansas State. Notre Dame announced an outbreak yesterday. Florida Atlantic, South Florida, got postponed literally like an hour ago. The Big Ten is joining in late. The SEC is just getting started this week. You got poor Baylor, who can't get a game in to save their lives. Same with TCU. You've got Houston, which announced today that it can't play North Texas and now has had their 4th season opener postponed, I think, 4 times. And then the Pac-12's like thinking about coming up with some kind of plan that might put them on the field in November. Who knows where that's going to lead. Man, despite all this effort, you get the financial side. Everybody's trying to play games. Everybody's trying to get home games. Everybody's trying to play conference games. And you know what? They're trying to make some money, which is what this is all about. Then the University of Texas announces today that will lose an estimated $162 million because of the pandemic. And then Iowa State said earlier in the day today, it faces a $35 million shortfall, Parker. I guess maybe we shouldn't have really tried to play football this year after all, or am I being defeatist?
I don't want to straight up say you're being defeatist, John, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that because like you mentioned, a lot of these athletic departments are facing 8 and 9-figure shortfalls in their annual budgets, and they're trying to offset that by whatever means possible by just trying to get as many football games on the schedule and played as they can, because football is the biggest revenue generator for an athletic department. And look, I get that, as we see all these cancellations week in and week out, and it seems like every week we're seeing multiple games get knocked off the schedule or postponed or indefinitely pushed off. It's really hard to comprehend that this is where college football has come to, but I stand firm on the belief that football in any capacity is better than no football, John, because quite frankly, what would you and I be doing right now if there were no college football? And I get that we're not the only ones with a stake, obviously, in the way that this all plays out. But I'm sure the vast majority of Americans are more than thankful to have football in any form or fashion on their screen on Saturdays. So I'm enjoying it. I'm hoping that we're able to get the rest of this season in, hoping that the COVID-19 pandemic will hold off as much so as possible to allow these college football programs to address these issues that they're facing with the budgetary crises that have arisen from a result of the pandemic. And it's such an interesting conglomeration of circumstances, John, and there's no right answer. There's obviously no one-size-fits-all solution to all of this, and I don't think we should have that expectation. I don't think that canceling the college football season is going to fix any more problems than it would create, because at that point you're talking about having to cut more sports, you're talking about having to lay off employees. College football, I would venture to say, John, for a vast majority of FBS level athletic programs, it's the only thing keeping them financially afloat right now. And a lot of those programs aren't going to be willing to go into detail about the inner workings of their financials and their budget and how much they're actually being affected, because it's easy to throw out a number and say, okay, this is how much we're short. But it's another thing to say, okay, this is how much we're short, and this is how it's going to impact us. Here's the effect that it's going to have 3 to 5 years down the road. And here's the bigger picture, as opposed to this is the amount of money that we're not making this year.
Well, you say that. and then news comes out today that the Football Bowl Association has filed a waiver to the NCAA. We know how that can go. But they're asking for relief from the NCAA for its bowl eligibility requirements. In other words, no 6 wins. No, I guess, any wins. I mean, yeah, at this point, you've got more bowl slots literally than you have teams actually playing football, I believe. Some bowls are going to get canceled. Some already have been. Some are going to they're going to lose so much money that they're probably just going to close up shop permanently. I mean, if you think about it, those minor bowls are on such shaky ground to begin with. But Parker, man, I'm all about an 0-7 Kansas getting invited to the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl to take on 0-6 Indiana, aren't you?
Quite honestly, yes, John, because, listen, I want as much football come bowl season as I can handle. Feed it to me. Give me all the bowl season football. And, obviously, like we said, there is no good solution here. There's no satisfactory solution. And so at this point, we just got to do whatever we can. The NCAA has got to do whatever it can, and these conferences have to do whatever they can to make sure that we maintain as much of a sense of normalcy as possible. Listen, I might be alone. I'm willing to die on this hill, John. I might be completely alone here. It sounds like you're not quite on the same page, but I am willing to witness and push for and be a part of any measure necessary to make sure that we're still playing college football every week until January. Whatever that looks like, whatever that needs to look like, if it means just shutting down attendance from fans, if it means playing every single game with no fans, if it means testing athletes with more rigor and more regularity, so be it. But to not play football, John, I don't know if people can comprehend how big of an impact that would have on not just the athletic departments, not just the universities, not just the spectators, but one thing you forget, John, is that college football stimulates the local economy too. And I know it may not be as much of a concern for Norman, but you think about a town like Pullman, Washington, right? A town of 30,000 with an FBS program in Washington State at the heart of the city on campus. Think of how much of an impact not having game days will have on the Pullman economy. And look, the Pac-12 right now isn't playing football. Yeah, they're kind of working to hopefully figure out a solution and get 7 or 8 games in an ideal world. But right now, as it stands, I think a lot of people are considering the impact that it's going to have on these universities and how they're going to suffer and what they're going to have to do to combat the loss of an entire football season. Very few people are considering the greater effect that it has on the economy as a whole, especially to these towns, some of which are very much dependent on college football game days to maintain a healthy economy throughout the fall.
Yeah, you really don't have to go any further than Stillwater, Oklahoma, where the local vendors and merchants are dependent for their very life or death on Oklahoma State football games, and the attendance, which has been stripped, as we know, to 25%. So here's hoping that gets turned around at some point, because you're right, it's a huge part of this equation. For our listeners, our readers, our viewers, here's the bottom line. Oklahoma had their game pushed back a couple weeks, and they played an FCS team. Then they had an open date. Now they get 3 straight Big 12 games on 3 straight Saturdays. Kansas State, Iowa State, and Texas. That's going to be hard as hell to navigate with the COVID protocols and the contact tracing that dings guys out of the lineup. It's going to be crazy to watch. And like Lincoln Riley said, it's going to be unpredictable. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, Lincoln Riley had some interesting things to say about the NCAA, marijuana, and his 3 suspended players. If you haven't heard this yet, you're not going to want to miss it. Hey, are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond, or maybe you're a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you just want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Well, then consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Find Parker at Parker Thune, Thune. I'm at John E. Hoover. Parker's also on Instagram, Parker Thune, and you'll find me on Facebook at John E. Hoover Media. Our website now is allsooners.com, where you're going to find lots, and I mean lots, of OU coverage. 5 to 7 new stories literally every day. Videos, interviews. Man, I got a good one coming up tomorrow. Trust me, you guys are going to love it. Actually, I got 2 good ones, but the big one is chef's kiss. The video version of this podcast, of course, is over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. And listen, I want to reiterate, if you own a business and you like what you hear from this podcast and you want to advertise with us, we can help you out, just like you can help us out. Lots of options to suit your needs. Drop us an email at allsoonersi@gmail.com. Okay, Parker, let's get to this bit from Lincoln Riley. Bill Haston of the Tulsa World got on the Zoom call yesterday and asked Lincoln about the guys who were suspended before the bowl game last year. We know who they are: Ronnie Perkins, Trajan Bridges, and Ramondre Stevenson. But Bill didn't just ask him what we've all been asking him for the past 2 months. He kind of pinned him down and said, Lincoln, you should have an answer from the NCAA, and by God, we should have an answer from you, which is what all of us have been wanting. He didn't really say that. Those are my words, but there was that tone. Lincoln took the opportunity, after a brief pause to think it over, took the opportunity and he jumped all over it. I love his answer here. Here's the question, and here's Lincoln's response. Take a listen.
Lincoln, I understand it's been a wild year for the NCAA, but isn't there someone in Indianapolis who's empowered to spend 2 hours studying the facts of your situation and make a decision? And is the delay, has it been explained to your compliance people, or has it just been silence from Indianapolis?
It's a good question. I certainly understand the question.
It just seems really unfair to you, to the position coaches, to the athletes. I mean, like I said, I know this is a weird year for the NCAA, obviously. It's unprecedented, nuts. But it just seems to me that like somebody in Indy could like take an afternoon, study it all, and arrive at a resolution so you guys can move on and know what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're approaching it with those guys like that we won't have them, and then if we happen to get some good news, then we'll adjust from there. And those guys are doing the same. I mean, so I think in a sense we've all we're not sitting there dwelling on it day to day. It's been a challenging year for the NCAA. There's a lot on their plate right now, but this is. That's a big issue. I mean, it is. It's and it's a much bigger issue than these three players, and that's and I think maybe that's part of why the process has been a little bit slower than all of us would like. But it's you're talking about an archaic rule within the NCAA, and you're talking about a world that has really changed on that subject, and it's a big deal. It is. It's. The unfortunate matter is you could go have a first positive test at just about any NCAA school in the country, and you're gonna get counseling, and you're gonna get all the support that you need at so many of these great schools. And right now, studies are showing that's how you win. That's how you beat this. That's how you actually help a player, help a person that has made a mistake. And I think a lot of these schools have figured that out. And I think, there's been some really positive trends, and I think developments there. The fact that if you have the same test from the NCAA that you miss 6 games, and the disparity between that is, it's not right. And I am confident that it's going to get fixed or get, head to a more appropriate spot. And again, my experience from that comes from the players you see over the years, and how could we have helped them? How could we have done better? And right now it's about that. And so I don't know if something will change in time to affect these guys, obviously for their sake. I hope it does, because it is really severe, especially when only a couple of teams in the country a year get tested. But they made a mistake, and they're living with the consequences right now, and hopefully something gets changed before that. If not, hopefully it gets changed for all the rest of the players, and for just the good of the game.
So you really had no hoped for or expected, like the Texas game or a certain week where you're thinking, I kind of sense that maybe we'll get something that week.
No. I mean, I don't think it, game wise, this or that. I think it's bigger than that. I mean, I think this is a big policy, and listen, it's something that, this is something that should have been changed a long time ago. You're not going to find anybody that argues with that, but it's unfortunate. But at the same time, it is what it is right now. Like I said, we've come to terms with it. Our players have. If something happens, I think that would be great and the right thing to do. But if something happens later on, like I said, at least it doesn't put other people and other players in what has become a situation for those guys that's not right, and it's not conducive to somebody actually improving and getting better and addressing the issue at hand. And that's the problem that I have with it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Parker, your thoughts on what Lincoln said?
Well, it's a really interesting spin on the whole conversation, John, because first off, it was a brilliant question by Bill, as you mentioned. Great angle, got right to the point, really forced Lincoln to you could tell he was kind of uncomfortable answering that question for just a second there until Bill elaborated a little bit more. But the fact that Lincoln went straight for that particular aspect of this whole narrative, not the suspensions, but the rationale behind the suspensions, the motive behind the suspensions, I thought was really interesting. And I think it's further evidence of how progressive thinking Lincoln Riley is as a coach, because you can tell that he's one of those guys that is pushing a new agenda in college football. You can tell that in the way he schemes his offense. You can tell that in the way he recruits. You can tell that in the way he leads his team. And I think this is just further evidence on a much larger scale that Lincoln Riley wants to foster change. And, support marijuana, don't support marijuana. I don't know whether I really fall on one end of the spectrum or not, John, and that's kind of something that everybody has their own opinions on. However, I think what's clear is that Lincoln Riley, in terms of what his players or how his players are conducting themselves off the field, the way he sees it, right? This doesn't enhance their play at all. This isn't something that's illegal in the state of Oklahoma anymore, obviously with certain provisions there. So it's really just him issuing a public challenge to the NCAA. Hey, this needs to be revisited, right? Times have changed. This deserves another look. And so I thought it was interesting that was the angle that Riley took, not necessarily addressing the NCAA's timeline on the suspensions, but saying, hey, we need to question and we need to take a deeper look at why these suspensions occurred. And in addition, why do they need to continue occurring if the nature of the suspension and the motive behind the suspension no longer falls in line with local and state regulations?
He basically said suspending them doesn't help them. We need to come up with a way to help them. I was fascinated by that. Here's the tricky part now with this particular case. I think we've known for a little while now that one reason why OU doesn't have a reply to their request for an appeal to lift the suspensions is because there apparently isn't actually an avenue for such a thing. You don't actually appeal a marijuana suspension with the NCAA. It's a hard and fast rule, and it's an archaic one, as Lincoln Riley says multiple times over the past 2 months, but there's no actual appeal. I thought Kerry Murdoch from Sooner Scoop put it best when he wrote what Lincoln was actually after here was not an appeal, but not even a pardon, but a reform. In July, if you think about this, I looked this up, Parker, and marijuana was illegal in 8 states. This was in July. It's now September. You know how many states it is illegal in now? Again, I looked it up. 3. Idaho, South Dakota, and Nebraska. That's how fast this thing is changing. The NBA, the NFL. Lincoln Riley's 100% right. They don't test players for recreational alcohol anymore like they did back in the 50s or 60s or whatever. And there's a reason for that. Times change, laws change, people change. But the NCAA remains slow to change. It's kind of sad. On the website this week, I got to tell you, I wrote a pretty cool story on Theo Howard's transfer to OU. Basically, his journey from UCLA through multiple injuries. Poor guy. He was on the Zoom call yesterday, and I got a question into him as well as Lincoln about him. And I thought Lincoln's answer was really cool. He said, we scouted him on film when he decided to transfer here, and we told him these are some things he needs to work on, and he worked on those. I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that was part of the equation. That's pretty cool. And then I didn't know this either. Dennis Simmons, the OU wide receiver coach, recruited him to Washington State. I knew that, but I didn't know it was way back in 2014. But Dennis Simmons got to OU in 2015 and on and on and on. So here we are. They're back together again. I thought that was a cool aspect of this story. And then I've got another story on Jaden Davis tomorrow. Talked with him and Alex Grinch again on the Zoom today. And, man, compelling stuff about hitting the freshman wall and how he got over that. I'm going to get that on the website again tomorrow, allsooners.com. Parker, what are some of the stories that of your favorite stories maybe that you've worked on this week?
I'll tell you what, I thought it was really intriguing to hear Alex Grinch and some of the Sooner defenders talk about Patrick Fields today, because obviously when he emerged as the lone defensive captain for the Sooners in this 2020 campaign, it might have taken a few people by surprise, because you look at that defensive roster top to bottom and you say, okay, Trey Brown seems like a logical candidate. Maybe you look at Ronnie Perkins. Maybe you look at one of the more experienced senior guys like a John Michael Terry, for instance. But no, it was the junior safety, Patrick Fields, out of Tulsa. And I thought it was really cool to hear his teammates talk about the leadership that he brings, not just to the football field, but to the locker room, and how he leads by example off the field, in addition to on the field. And I thought Alex Grinch had a really, really interesting perspective as well, because he said, Pat's one of those guys that couples great play on the field with a real solid walk off the field, and that's a really easy thing for other guys to get behind. And Pat, he's just very thankful to be in this position, being a guy from right down the road, going to Tulsa Union High with Trey Brown. And listen, what he said was that growing up in Oklahoma, the Sooners are the professional football team. You don't grow up rooting for an NFL team. You grow up rooting for the Sooners. And so he just views it as a blessing and a continual challenge to be the defensive captain now for the team that he grew up pulling for. So I thought that was cool. Also, Spencer Rattler, man. That dude is something else. Just the entire aura that he has as an individual and that swagger that he brings. And you can tell that some of it is due just to his natural ability on the football field. He knows he's good. But he also said yesterday, when we talked to him via Zoom, John, that confidence is in the culture at Oklahoma. He said, listen, with this group of teammates, with this group of coaches, I can't help but be confident. And his words were, we all have this swag about us. And so I'm interested to see how that will play out the rest of the season and see if this reincarnated 2020 Sooner squad, as opposed to the Baker Mayfield team, the Kyler Murray team, the Jalen Hurts team. I'm interested to see what the dynamic is of this Spencer Rattler-led Sooner squad and how that swagger continues to manifest itself throughout the year.
Parker, you got that SI Sooners podcast swag, don't you?
Do I?
Don't you?
I mean, I guess I'll take that. If that's what you want to throw at me, I'll by all means accept that. I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose.
There you go. Swag it up. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we got a new segment. You're going to like this. It's Parker's idea if you don't. It's the SI Sooners podcast Mailbag.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the SI Sooners podcast, rolling along. Man, we better not be postponed this week. That's all I'm saying. That'd be 2 open dates in a row, and that would suck.
I was just encouraged to hear you say, I hope we don't get canceled this weekend at the beginning of the segment, John, because it sounded like from what you were saying in the first segment that you hated football and hated the Sooners. So glad to hear you singing a bit of a different tune.
You know, as it stands right now, which is a little before 6 o'clock on Wednesday, September 23rd, Kansas State comes to Norman at 11 a.m. Saturday. You can watch that game on Fox. Other games around the Big 12, we hit on this on our previous podcast, but we need to do it again because we're at midweek. Iowa State visits TCU at 12:30, Fox Sports 1. Texas visits Texas Tech at 2:30 on Fox. West Virginia plays at Oklahoma State at 2:30, which is sketchy, but on ABC. Can you imagine being West Virginia and having to get on a plane and not knowing what your test results are? That's pretty scary, which is what Oklahoma's going to do next week when they play, next week. When they hit the road. Kansas visits Baylor at 6:30 on ESPNU. Parker, let's jump into our new segment. This was your idea. It's called the SI Sooners Podcast Mailbag. Pretty simple. If you want to sponsor the mailbag, drop us an email at allsoonersi@gmail.com. If you want to participate in the mailbag, just hit me up on Twitter at John E. Hoover or Parker at Parker Thune. Okay, first up, it's an easy one. Jason Moore asks, predict the first play. He said it's going to be a run to the right side with TJ Pledger. Parker, I'll go first. I say a deep throw over the middle to Charleston Rambo. Think Lincoln Riley wants Spencer Rattler to showcase that arm to the Kansas State defense. Parker, what say you?
Well, interesting. I've got to take similar to yours, John. I think Lincoln Riley is very much ahead of the game in terms of analytics and realizes that it's worth it to throw on first down as opposed to running the ball. So I think it is going to be a pass play. I think it goes to Austin Stogner, though. Short pass pattern, maybe a flat.
Oh, you love you some Austin Stogner.
Yes, I do. 2 to 4 yards. Get the ball out to Stogner, get him in space, see if he can create. But I think the first play of the game is not going to be a shot downfield. It'll just be a play to try and get some chunk yardage, and I think Stogner's the guy. So we'll see how it pans out.
Gonzo Strangelove on Twitter asks, what are the chances a lot of contending teams get to mid-December and are short having played a full or qualifying slate of games regarding the playoff? Like 1/3 of the games have not been played, a quarter of the games have not been played. Does the committee, the playoff committee, extend the season to get those games, those later games scheduled in late December, even into January? I'd like to think that's a possibility, Parker, but I say no. This weird season with everything that's going on. They're going to do with what they've got on December 19th or December 20th, whatever that is. They're going to play the playoff as is. Parker, what do you think?
Well, no, consider this, John. If you're talking about the playoffs, if you're talking about the college football playoff being played, say, the second and third week of January, right? And that's what it's scheduled for, and that's what you're planning on, come hell or high water, you're going to have 4 teams competing for the college football playoff come the second week of January. Now, if you get to the end of the season and say you have Big Ten teams in the mix or Pac-12 teams in the mix that joined the game late, and you're talking about pushing the college football playoff back, say, into February in order to accommodate a couple extra regular season games for those teams, then I think you're giving the Big Ten and the Pac-12, if those are the conferences in question, you're giving them an unfair advantage, especially given the fact that they elected not to play college football and then jump back in at literally the last second to try and salvage their season because they realized that the rest of the college football landscape was proceeding without them. So I think for the conferences and for the teams that have been in this from the beginning, you've got to remain faithful to them. It's not your problem, and it's not your fault that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were late to the game, made a hasty decision, and had to backtrack on it. What's not fair to those programs and to those conferences that have committed and have been committed from the beginning to playing the 2020 college football season, what's not fair to them is to push the playoffs back for the sake of the teams that were behind the curve.
Yeah. Even considering the teams that are coming in late, I think the consideration is mainly for teams like the Big 12, like the ACC, like the SEC in this case, some of the maybe group of 5 worthy UCF teams that will lose a game or 2 or 3 or 4 because of the virus, because of the pandemic, because of the shutdown. So you can't, you have to put a hard date in and say, this is when we're starting. You guys that started late, sorry about you. That's the way it is. Straight to the point from Peter McAdams. What's your gut tell you about the chances Kansas State will be able to play? Parker, I say it's 50-50. I really do. I think there's a chance Chris Kleiman could be pulling like a Lou Holtz. You know, oh, poor us. We got no chance at this game. They're going to beat our brains out. But I think he's also being totally forthright when he says they're close to missing the threshold. They're close, and they only had one extra guy last week. So I hate to waffle. I hate to ride the fence, but I think it's 50-50. I think he's scared. I think he's genuinely concerned. If, let's just say, they're able to get to Norman and get their final test, and they've got enough players to play, that's all you're shooting for. That's all you're hoping for is just get out there on the field, win by 35, lose by 35. Man, in 2020, I don't know if that stuff matters anymore. What about you, Parker?
First off, John, props for the Lou Holtz impression. I did not expect it to be that on point.
Thank you very much.
I did not expect it to be that on point for an Alaskan Oklahoma implant. That was admittedly impressive. But
my short radio career, I actually did quite a few Lou Holtz impersonations on the air and got some applause.
Oh gosh, we're gonna have to start a social media campaign of some sort to get John to do an entire segment as Lou Holtz, but we can shelve that for another day. But no, in terms of the game this week, I think we're going to know by tomorrow, John. I would be willing to bet that come 48 hours from game time, which would be tomorrow, let's say tomorrow at noon, so technically 47 hours if you really want to be that scrupulous about it. But I think by tomorrow we will know for sure whether Oklahoma and Kansas State are going to play this weekend. I'm about with you, John. I would say I lean more towards the 60-40, 70-30 as to saying, yeah, they're going to play, simply because I find it hard to believe that Kansas State is actually going to run up against one of those positional minimums or against the 53-man roster minimum. But I do think that come tomorrow morning, come tomorrow afternoon, come tomorrow, we're going to know definitively, because I think once you get on to Friday, it's way too late in the game to call it off.
Last one, Matt Morton asks, with the way K-State and Iowa State played 2 weeks ago, does OU really have anything to gain by playing these games? Like, if they win by 40, it's no big deal. But if they don't, it's a disaster. Well, I see that point. I do. But I think this year, like I said before, 2020, I'm not sure any of that counts. Style points or reputation or what the playoff thinks about you, any of that. If you get to play the game and you're able to win it, then for my money, you're in the playoff conversation. If OU gets 2 games wiped out, finishes 8-0, and wins the Big 12, they're in the playoff conversation. And I think the same thing happens in the SEC and the Big Ten and the ACC somehow. If OU somehow gets left out, I think this is a year that you call that a win. I'm serious. I mean it. You go 8-0. A couple other teams get in the playoff ahead of you. It's a win. You got to play some football. You won some games. You had a nice season, and you got paid handsomely, presumably. If you can navigate the virus at this point, keep your kids healthy as much as you can for the most part, and win some games, that's a win-win. What say you, Parker?
Oh, I mean, hey, if you go 8-0 and don't make the college football playoff, you can just hang that 2020 National Champions banner in the style of the Pokes. But no, on a more serious note, I do think, John, that style points matter more for Oklahoma than any other team in college football, simply because it looks like the Big 12 is that bad. Honestly, like, as long as the Pac-12 isn't playing football, top to bottom, the Big 12 is the worst conference in the Power 5 this year, and it's really not close. And so Oklahoma needs to take every opportunity to score style points against these lower level opponents. Kansas State is not going to challenge Oklahoma on Saturday. They're just not. They don't have the firepower. They're not going to have the personnel. They're going to be shorthanded as it is. There's absolutely not a chance that Oklahoma gets a run for their money from Kansas State. At least there shouldn't be a chance, especially in Norman. However, Oklahoma needs to understand that because the rest of the Big 12 has started in utterly ignominious fashion, the public perception of this conference is as low as it's been in a long time. And so, I think the only scenario in which we're having a conversation about Oklahoma making the college football playoffs, John, is if they have a 1 in the loss column at the end of the year. I think if they go undefeated, they're in, because I think they still have enough of a brand and they have that name recognition to be able to vault into the playoffs over maybe another one-loss team or potentially undefeated team that they'd be squaring off against. But I do think Oklahoma's brand would win out in that case. But if Oklahoma loses, if they slip up, which it doesn't look likely at this point, John, but let's be straight here. Oklahoma slips up every year, it seems like, and it's never to the same team, and it's always completely out of the blue, but they always seem to slip up. If and when they slip up, they're going to need to be able to formulate as strong a resume as possible in order to get back into that college football playoff conversation, because this is a sprint. It's no longer a marathon. Odds are, John, you may have 4 undefeated teams in the college football playoff at the end of the year simply by virtue of the fact that they're only playing 8, 10, 11 game schedules as opposed to 13 and 14 game schedules. So the margin for error is that much smaller, and for Oklahoma, there's almost no margin for error, almost none. And so every game counts, and Lincoln Riley and the Sooners need to take every game seriously and make sure that they're doing everything they can to beat these teams into the ground and emphasize and add credence to the notion that they are one of the 4 best teams in college football and leave no doubt in the eyes of the committee.
Create some separation between themselves and the rest of the Big 12. A little more news. OU got a basketball commit this week. C.J. Nolan committed to the Sooners on Monday. Parker, what can you tell us about him and how he fits into Lon Kruger's plans to apparently hoard or keep stacking up all these combo guards?
Yeah, so Nolan's second commit in the class of 2021 for Oklahoma following Bijan Cortez, who's out of Kingfisher, Oklahoma, obviously top in-state prospect in the class. But Nolan is a big, bulky guy, 6'3", 215, well-built for a guard, versatile, can slash, can shoot a little bit. He's one of those guys that Lon Kruger is going to be able to flex around a little bit and play in an extremely versatile role. And I think when you're looking at the Sooners backcourt and how it's going to shake out next winter, you got him, you got Bijan Cortez, you got the 2 transfer guards in Umoja Gibson and Elijah Harkless, and then you got Davion Harmon, who was a stud as a freshman and looks like he's going to be the anchor in that backcourt for years to come. Sooners are looking deep, and there's no one guy that jumps out off the page at you and you say, okay, that guy's going to score 20 points a game for the Sooners. But I think the depth is where Kruger and the Sooners are going to find their sweet spot.
Interesting. Jalil Farouk, remember, the wide receiver from Maryland, he's going to commit on Sunday. Can't forget that. Could be a big announcement. I think everybody around here expects some good news for Oklahoma. Parker, is there anything going on with the Big 3, Kamar Wheaton, Bryce Foster, or Emeka Egbuka?
Nothing new I can speak of, John. Obviously, Wheaton and Foster it looks like those two are far more likely to commit to Oklahoma than Egbuka, at least at this point. Caleb Williams, obviously, is going to have to, I think, work on Egbuka a little bit more before that becomes a realistic possibility. But we're getting down to crunch time, John, and we don't know how National Signing Day is going to work because obviously the recruiting dead period has been extended through the end of 2020, so you may see National Signing Day pushed back. But one way or another, I think the Sooners should be looking forward to this weekend because I think they got a real good chance to land Jalil Farouk. And then I think they're in a real good spot to potentially bring home Foster and Wheaton as well. And we'll see about Egbuka.
Have to keep our eye on that. Listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts, or just go to our website, allsooners.com. Click on the player and listen as you like, either on your phone, your tablet, your computer. And do not forget to check out the video version over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.